Welcome, everyone. My name is Charity Rouse. I am the Director of Local History for the Spartanburg County Public Library System. Tonight, we will be talking about the women in the family, marriages, changing surnames, and old maids. Oh my! Um, I've had fun researching a couple of sets of the quote old maids in the family over the past year, and I'm excited to show and share with you some of the things that I have learned. Um, But one of the things, that you will see is there are a number of things, that the women in the family tend to create things. For instance, the piece of art on the screen here is one of my mother's, cold wax oil paint, um, pieces, and, it's a favorite of mine. It's one that's in my collection. So, I thought it made a nice cover for this program. And if I can get my slide to change there. So, finding out more about the women in our family can be difficult. Sometimes Mrs. J.J. Rouse is all we know about who she might be. We will discuss some ways to locate records and how to reframe what we know about our female ancestors. When available, marriage records can, when available, marriage records can be great to locate maiden or additional surnames to search for additional records. Unfortunately, marriage records are not always available, particularly here in South Carolina. And don't forget the old maids in the family. Often their estates and records provide insight into the whole rest of the family, in addition to their own circumstances. We're going to start out looking at some marriage records. From marriage bonds to marriage licenses, newspaper notices of engagements, weddings, or divorce decrees, to birth and death certificates of children, the records surrounding marriage can be both helpful and frustrating. My marriage examples are from Virginia, as only a few South Carolina counties have placed their marriage records online, and Spartanburg is not one of them. And I wanted to show you a couple of different types of records created for the same people. So this is in Carroll County, Virginia, 1857. So this is at the top left, that handwritten bit is for Esau Worrell. Please give Wesley Goad license to marry my daughter Tabitha, signed James Gardner. Um, so James was literate. He was writing this. This is his own handwriting. Spelling is a little interesting. Esau Worrell is married into my direct line family, as were many of the clerks of court in Carroll County. At the bottom on the left, this is the bond. Know all men by these presents that we, Wesley Goad and Robert Goad, are bound firmly to. Now, just one note about this bond. It was basically a bond of their oath that if the wedding did not take place because the groom was lying in some way, such as they were already married or they decided to skip town after signing this oath, then the groom or the other bondsman, in this case Robert Goad, presumably Robert, his father, would have to pay the fee to the state. The bride is not getting the fee, whatever, it's to the state. So, but no money changed hands at this point, unless there was a small filing fee for the document. So some people are like, oh, they had to pay a lot of money to get married. No, no. This is just in case the groom was nefarious and gonna skip town, this helped them not do that. In most cases, it was just a formality. And it said that Wesley Goad intended to marry Tabitha Gardner, or Tobitha Gardner, or Bitha. She went by Bitha. Um, so, and then on the right-hand side of the page is the license. Yeah, it's a bad image. Hopefully they're getting better scans these days. But it does say the date of marriage, place of marriage, um, full names of the parties to be married, age of husband, 20 something, age of wife, condition of husband, they were both single at the time. Place of husband's birth and wife's birth were both Carroll County, Virginia. The name of husband's parents, Robert and Emily Goad, and the name of wife's parents, James and Emily Gardner. Robert and it wasn't Emily. Anyway, I will remember it at some point. And he was a farmer. Also in Virginia, beginning in 1853, in most counties, and most of these survive, these are now in large part available on both Ancestry and Family Search. But these are marriage registers that are kept at the county level, and they have the same information. So sometimes you can find multiple records for the same action, in this case, a marriage. They also have births and deaths. Sometimes they're not complete. Some county clerks were better than others. And then sometimes the record sets overlap. So you have both the register and the licenses. Sometimes only one set of documents has survived. And so sometimes they include mother's maiden names. Often they don't. This doesn't. And then also, if you're looking in South Carolina, just know marriage records were not ordered to be kept even at the county level until July of 1911. So still a couple years before we get births and deaths, which didn't start until January of 1915. But these types of records you may find in other states, depending on where you were researching. So this is what a more recent certificate of marriage looks like. This is from 1943. They were asking more information, including present name of bride, maiden name of bride. So sometimes if this is a second or third marriage, you can get at least the previous marriage name as well as the maiden name. The age, race, single, widowed, or divorced, previous number of times married for each of the parties, their occupation, and then their birthplaces, and father's full name, mother's full name. These do have the maiden names of the mothers by this time period. Residence of each, the bride and the groom, and then the proposed date of marriage and location, and then when the license was issued, and then the minister's return was on this particular document. So they got married on May 1st. So a little bit more about this. This is my paternal grandparents. You do get the newspaper announcement of the marriage. They did not have a photo with this one. And you will notice Miss Turner's wedding held to J.J. Rouse. So you got to remember, search under J.J. Rouse and his name and all of those things, because you may find that it doesn't always show up with her first name, last name, with either last name, but always search for both. So Miss Turner's wedding held to J.J. Rouse. And then you get information that, Miss Elizabeth Davis Turner, daughter of Otho S. Turner and the late Mrs. Elizabeth Davis Turner of Eastern Shore, to John Joseph Rouse, son of Mrs. William F. Rouse of Norfolk. Now, this is the only place that my great-grandfather is ever referred to as William F. Um, WMF, Fitz, F, Fitz, Hugh, 2 words, and Fitzhugh. And he went by Fitzhugh from all accounts. So you gotta check all of the man's variants for the wife. It gives information about where, um, the wedding took place, which was in her sister and brother-in-law's house, and her brother-in-law walked her down the aisle. Gives you the minister's name and lots of decoration information. Um, the whole 9 yards about the wedding gown. And the string of pearls was her only ornament. I have that string of pearls because sometimes being the only granddaughter makes a difference. And then it tells about the wedding party. And who the best man was. And then they had an informal reception and they took a wedding trip through the Valley of Virginia where I grew up and where they will reside when they get back and what she wore for the departure. So, but this is the wedding dress as described in that article. And he was probably wearing this suit. The photo on the right is actually from some engagement pictures a couple weeks earlier than the wedding. And yes, they were both very tall and skinny people. This example doesn't come from my family. It comes from a friend of mine's family, and it is an unusual case, but just don't forget to check across state lines. So this form here is a 1932 marriage in Webster County, West Virginia, of my friend's grandparents. And I kept getting hints on Ancestry when I was building the tree for this 1962 marriage certificate in Covington, Virginia, in Allegheny County, which is literally the neighboring county to Greenbrier County in West Virginia, where they were living. And finally, I looked at it and I went, well, all of this information is correct. He was age 70 and 62. He had been divorced. And she was 62 and had been single. And when I queried an extended family member, they said, oh, they went to get her on Social Security and found out that the 1932 marriage in West Virginia was not entirely legal because his divorce had not been actually finalized. And then they got outed by the newspaper. So this is the Beckley Post Herald, and it is reporting marriage licenses from the neighboring Virginia county, Allegheny County, thus letting everyone know that for 30 years, they had not been legally married. Now, I have done some digging into the first wife of Daniel, and she remarried in 1933, but doesn't seem to have had problems. So it may just be that he figured signing the document was enough for the divorce, and there was a waiting period of some sort. Or she just didn't get caught in whatever information communication issue that they got caught in when she applied for Social Security at age 62. So when you're finding odd hints, sometimes it's good to take a look at them because sometimes there's a story. And yes, my friend knows I'm telling this story. All involved are deceased. If it's your family, sorry. I just find it to be an insanely interesting family dynamic. Now, Divorces in South Carolina became legal on April 15th of 1949. If you have someone who was divorced prior to that, they didn't get divorced in South Carolina because you had to petition the legislature to grant you the divorce. And as far as I know, 0 divorces were granted prior to divorce being legalized in April of 1949. You'll see some things that tell you 1950. That's what I thought for years until I realized that there were a lot more divorce decrees filed in 1949 than I thought. And so I went back and looked at the legal records in the law books and found it was signed by the governor on April 15th, 1949. Happy tax day. So, we do have situations where people may have claimed divorce and then did a common law marriage, or one of the two went out of state, got a divorce, and came back. So just know you may have to look in other places if there was a legal divorce. Divorce certificates overall, although some of Virginia's are available on Ancestry, along with the marriages, births, and deaths, pursuant to the legal delay. I think in Virginia it's 25 years before it becomes public for death, divorce, and marriage, and then 50 years for 100 years for birth. In South Carolina, birth is 100 years, death is 50 years, and marriage is fully public from the date it is official in court. But it depends on the county as to whether they are available online. As I mentioned before, Spartanburg, it is not available online. You literally have to go down to the courthouse, to the clerk of probate court, and pay your, I think it's still $5 fee to get each marriage. Divorces, you have to petition the court that provided the divorce. And so that is a little bit more restricted. There are some places and some states where the rules are different. And so you may find some additional divorce decrees out there, but overall you have to go to the court, which is why I don't have that West Virginia divorce decree, because I haven't figured out which county to ask my friend to go petition. So, just a reminder of the variety of names you may find for women. This is my great-grandmother, J.J. Rouse's mom, J. Rouse's mom. She was Carrie Allen Allen. Most often you see her as Mrs. Carrie Rouse, but in her obituary, she's Mrs. Carrie A. Rouse or Carrie Allen Rouse, widow of Fitzhugh Rouse. And it goes on to name the heirs and that kind of thing. She was also known as Mrs. W.M. F. Rouse, Mrs. William F. Rouse, and Mrs. Fitzhugh Rouse. So, and this is fewer names and documents than I have for Fitz. So just know people went by nicknames. Remarkably, in the 1920 census, her name was mistranscribed as Cassie instead of Carrie, and she was the enumerator for that page, so it was her own bad handwriting. So, you know, look at different spellings, look under any known nicknames, and go from there. So, and just because someone died in one location does not mean that they're buried there. My great-grandmother had lived in Norfolk, Virginia for 36 years, I think it said 26 years, um, and was active in the community there, but they were transporting the body back to Latta, South Carolina, to the Magnolia Cemetery for burial beside her husband, who died in 1915 when my grandfather was 1. So, um, the only place I have their marriage information is on their tombstone because they were married in 1902. So, it's just one of those things that sometimes you have to get creative. So, let's talk a little bit about the old maids in the family. So, especially in larger families, there may be old maid sisters. And I use that term unmarried sisters, um, independent ladies. The never married women may have had professional careers. In my tree, I've got plenty of teachers, university professors, government workers, nurses, and other clerical workers, that kind of thing, in the never married women. Um, two that have just recently come to light. I found two of them, or one of them on Friday, as I was researching the Manning family that you'll see in just a minute. I have not had time to work through any of that information. It was a little late to add it to this program, but just know, um, an unmarried sister is likely to leave fair number of records. And even those professional women who marry may or may not have had children. They may have been the ones to care for the parents, and they may have inherited or have life tenancy in the family home place. And this category can also include the widows, especially if they didn't have children of their own. But depending on when they were widowed, um, they may also qualify and create some of these paper trails. So this is up again in Carroll County, Virginia. So Wesley and Tobitha, um, who you saw in those marriage records, um, oops, yep, Wesley and Tobitha, and then Emmeline, Annis, and Lucy Goad of the second part. I thought I had blown up the right thing, but that's a different document. Um, that that for and in consideration of the love and affection I have for my daughters, Emmeline, Annis, and Lucy Goad, I give, grant, and convey unto these parties of the second part a certain tract or parcel of land in the county of Carroll in this waters of Cranberry Creek, known as the home tract, and all tracts adjoining this same heretofore deeded, same not heretofore deeded. He had broken out a lot of the various properties surrounding this core part of the property to the other children or their heirs. And the tracts contain about 237 acres. And then the reserves on this, that the parties of the first reserve the full right and control of said land during the lifetime of the said Wesley and Tobitha Goad to use or sell as they see proper. And it's further agreed and deeded that Emmeline Goad and Annis Goad and Lucy Goad is to have and to hold in equal part all money and personal property that the parties of the first part dies seized and possessed with. And then Wesley signs it, Tobitha signs her mark, and Mr. Hurst, a justice in and for said county of Carroll, certifies that they signed this in 1907, and then it is registered into the record by the clerk. This is a couple years later in 1909. And it is between Walter Goad, C.C. Goad, his wife, so my great-grandparents, the brother of these three sisters, and Wesley Goad and Tobitha, his wife, and Emmeline Goad, Annis Goad, and Lucy Goad, all parties of the second part. And so for in consideration of $200 paid in hand, remainder $100 to be paid 6 months after the date of this deed, Walter and Charity grant and convey to Wesley, Tobitha, the parcel of land to hold in fee simple in their lifetime, and then the land shall be the property of Emmeline, Annis, and Lucy Goad. Again, fee simple. We'll get more into these land terms next month, but that it is simple holding, and that they have life tenancy on it. And so they can live out their lives there. And then it denotes the borders and the neighbors of this. And Walter and Charity both signed it. Now this one, it was a treasure of a document when I found it at the courthouse last Labor Day weekend. In 1916, October 1916, Emmeline, Annis, and Lucy Goad are trying to figure out what they're going to do. Their mother has passed by this point. Their father passed earlier, and they cared for Tobitha. And that for in consideration of the love and affection of each other, being sisters in the flesh, doth grant, give, and convey all of their interest in all the land in their names as parties as follows, to wit, that if one dies, its interest goes to the two survivors, and if the second one dies, it all goes to the last survivor. And all of our personal property, money, and bonds we may die seized and possessed with, to the transfer to the last survivor of this contract. And at the death of Emmeline Goad, Annis Goad, and Lucy Goad, all of the above property goes to the heirs at law that may be living. And witnesses, Mr. Hurst, the clerk of court, and their three signatures. So, how did this play out? Well, they didn't file the probates for the first two who died until the third died. So the first to die was Annis, the second was Emmeline, and then the third was Lucy. So the records that this created include the administrator of their estates, John Alderman, who may have been a nephew, but I'm not positive. He may have just been a lawyer in town. I know there are some aldermans married into the family, but he was handling all three of these. On the left, on page 416, you will see on the bottom that it lists the heirs. So you have Lucy Goad, heir, deceased, and then Lucy Goad and Annis Goad on Emmeline's, both now deceased, is in 1957. On the right-hand side, there is an inventory and appraisement of the estate of Annis Goad, and it just says it's payable into the estate of Lucy. And then there's the inventory and appraisement of the estate of Emmeline Goad, deceased, again payable into the estate of Lucy Goad. And then the assets as they were determined in Carroll County Bank. Again, this is the Emmeline Goad estate account. And then in 1957, there was a statement of no inheritance tax. There wasn't enough property for the inheritance tax to kick in. But 1957 is when Lucy had passed away. Because Emmeline had passed away in 1946 and Annis in 1947. So this is 1956, so almost a decade later. And then on the left is the full page, on the right is the heirs at law as of 1957. What that means is if you die without a will, i.e. intestate, a will means you are testate, you have testated, you have given your testament of your last will and testament, what you want done with your belongings. Now, in that deed, we saw the three sisters say, first one goes, other two inherit. Second one goes, last one standing inherits. When the last one dies, it goes to our heirs at law. So this list is the heirs at law at the time in February of 1957. So W. Asa Goad is a brother, age 91. Ida Harris at 81 is a sister. Josie Largen, sorry, any cousins out there, at 79 is a sister. Walter Goad, my great-grandfather, at 75, he was the baby of the family, is a brother. And then you get into, and Allie Nestor at 83 as a sister. So 3 sisters, 2 brothers still surviving. I think there were 11 of them altogether. It was a passel of them. And then you get nephews, nieces, great nieces and great nephews, in order grouped by family. So these are the heirs of the remaining brothers and sisters. And so you get the full list of the people living in that immediate family as of February of 1957. This can be gold for finding maiden names for who did the sister actually marry, or who did the niece marry? All of those types of questions. You get the ages of these people. And the ages are all over the place because there's a niece who's 70 and Walter's 75. So you get the fact, hey, there are generations that are very close in age. So you can't just guess who the generation is, which is why they list the relationship as well as the age and the at least town where they were all living at the time. And some of them had moved around. So you might not have known that nephew Culver Bond there at the bottom had moved to Baltimore, Maryland. You may not have been aware that multiple of the family had moved to Buena Vista, not just the brother. My great-grandparents moved to Buena Vista, Virginia, in the early 19-teens. And so if you didn't know to look in that other place, this would be a very good thing to do. A couple moved to Kentucky and Ohio. So, and then one of them is listed as unknown, but they knew his name and his age and his relationship. And so they did everything they could to research and find out where he was, but nobody knew. But as far as they knew, he was still alive, so they had to list him as an heir at law. Well, what I knew of this particular thing was Mom's family story associated with these bonnets. In 1957, my mother and her sister and their mother stayed with her grandmother in Buena Vista while um, my great-grandfather, the brother, and my grandmother's brother, Uncle Glenn, went to Doug Spur to the estate auction. When Lucy died, they were cleaning out the parents' home place. Well, Uncle Glenn came back with a trunk, and it was a little bit of a treasure chest. And one of the things that was in this trunk were these two bonnets. They are of the vintage of about the 1890s. They would have been dress bonnets. They do not have handmade lace on them. This is machine made lace. Um, but it's, muslin, it's fancy. There's a little sunburning on the crowns of particularly the one on the left. I do not know who was wearing these, but it is highly likely um that these three sisters may have been some of the people who wore these. So, it's just kind of cool. I had the one on the right on my head earlier today. And it was just a very cool connection with, a lot of years ago, 130 years ago. Um, and so you may find these treasures. Hopefully, you have someone like my mother who remembers, well, at least part of the story of where they came from. So, um, one of the places to check is the cemetery. I mean, I'd say it was obvious, but sometimes we forget the obvious. Um, Tombstones may very well have the maiden name of women in them. And it may be a situation where there are many family plots kind of lined up in a row. Now, the Rouses are on the next row back and all the way close to the road on the other hand, whereas this one is kind of central on this particular block of uh cemetery plots. And if I'm remembering correctly, in the cemetery, if you turn around from where I took the picture on the right, it is another sister's plot where the parents, my great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents are buried. I'm not going to bore you with all of the tombstones, but Mabel Allen Manning is kind of key in this next story. Born in 1881, died in 1962. Now, I've switched sides of the family. This is my South Carolina paternal grandfather's side of the family. You will notice that there are two lonely stones in this whole Manning plot. The Mannings did have a couple of children, all of whom are buried elsewhere. Their daughter is one of those who got her doctorate. And so I need to do some digging. I take that back. Their granddaughter got a doctorate. As I said, I just found that information out on Friday, so I'm still trying to get everything assimilated into my head. I'm still waiting. There was no probate in Dillon County for Mabel Manning. So I'm presuming that she has probate in York County where she died. She had been visiting her daughter for a few months at that point. And I am waiting for confirmation from York County before I drive over there. It's on microfilm if they have it, if that's where it's filed. So one can only hope. There's always more to research. So here are some information about the three people involved in this last one standing. Again, it's three. Two of them are sisters. One is an aunt. And their sister's sister-in-law. It gets complicated. But Miss Ethel Allen dies in 1950 something. Um, need to see if I can move some stuff around there. Um, and she was known as Miss Epp. I don't know why, but Miss Epp. Um, and she was in Latta, South Carolina. It was 1962, I believe. And many years with her sisters, one of whom was Mabel Manning. Operated the Allen House, known for home cooked foods from New York to Florida. Now, I'd kind of like to be known as that cook in my obituary. Miss Allen was the daughter of the late Joseph Allen and Marion Bethea Allen. She was a member of the Latta Baptist Church and was active for many years in Sunday school and missionary society work. She taught school for several years at Balco School near Latta. Surviving are two sisters, Mrs. A.S. Manning of the home and Mrs. John Garner of Columbia, and a brother, Harris B. Allen of Miami, Florida. He's always fun in the family pictures. He is dressed much more casually than any of the South Carolinians. Funeral services will be held from Bethea Funeral Home, conveniently across the street from the Allen House, and interment will follow in Magnolia Cemetery. This is a marriage announcement of Mr. Austin Manning. So for once, the groom got the higher billing. But Mr. Austin Manning, the popular cashier of the Merchants and Farmers Bank of this town, was quietly married to Miss Mabel Allen, daughter of Joseph Allen, the 30th of this month, or last month, at 9:00 a.m. The ceremony was performed by Reverend D. Tiller at the home of the bride in the presence of a few intimate friends to whom the fact was made known just before the marriage. So they didn't quite elope, but close enough. Mr. Manning is independent of our town, or intendant of our town, proprietor of the Latta hardware store, and prominently connected with other business enterprises of the town, while the bride is a most charming young lady and a favorite of all who know her. That same minister is the one, according to family sources, who performed the marriage of my great-grandmother a few years before this. And then the Bethea Rouse is Reverend A.W. Jackson at the residence of the bride's father, September 25th, 1889. Mr. Walter M. Bethea of Marion County, South Carolina, and Miss Bessie Rouse of Williamsburg County, South Carolina. So the Rouses started in Darlington, were in Florence and Williamsburg counties for a bit. I mean, they're all right there together. So they moved around a little bit. The Walter M. Bethea is the brother of Marion Bethea Allen, the mother of Ethel and Mabel. Now, Bessie Rouse is the sister of my great-grandfather, Fitzhugh, who married Carrie, who is the sister of Mabel and Ethel. So, gets a little complicated, but the good thing to know is there weren't that many children, and Bessie and Walter didn't have any children. So it stops being so complicated at that point, but it means I have very few DNA matches on this particular side of the family. So let's look a little bit at these records. And now I gotta figure out how to make this advance again. Okay, so in the deeds of Dillon County, the summer, I found that Ethel Allen is selling to Mabel A. Manning for $5 and love and affection. So if you see something that's a particularly low value monetarily sale for the time period and location, look for those words love and affection, because you have to pay something, or it's not legal, but sometimes it's a token dollar or $5 or $10, something not terribly much, but enough to make it legal. And it is all that certain tract or lot of land situated and being in the town of Latta, containing 3/4 or of an acre, more or less, and bounded on the north by Mr. Smith, east by Walker Gaddy, on the south by Bamberg Street, which is 301501, um, and on the west by Richardson Street. And the grantor hereby retains a lifetime interest in this property. So, Ethel Allen selling the home place, that Allen house, um, that where she died, where they ran as a boarding house, to Mabel, who also lived there with her and worked there. But the recognition was Mabel had children. Mabel had heirs. So that was left to them. I guess they decided my great grandmother could fend for herself since she went off to Norfolk in the 1920s. And then we have Louise Bethay. So Bessie was Louise Elizabeth. And for $240 is selling to Mabel Manning. Her heirs and assigns forever, all that certain lot or piece of land lying and being situated in the county and state aforesaid in the town of Latta, and being bounded as follows: on the north by Leitner Street with a frontage of 35 yards on said street, on the east by lot of Marion Allen. So they were neighbors. Allen House faced the main road, and the Bessie's property was behind, facing a side road. I have driven that block, so I know where that basically is. And also all improvements now standing on said lot of land, provided, however, I am retaining a lifetime interest and lifelong possession of said property. This is the same lot that was deeded back to me by Mabel Manning by deed of date March 25th, 1940. So they were horse trading property back and forth a little bit at various times. But Bessie wanted life interests in this property, and Mabel Manning's heirs were bound by this to allow her to live there if she was not the last person standing. So, as I said, I'm still waiting for the York County information to see what Mabel Manning's probate actually does, because Mabel Manning was the last one standing by a few months. So it just depends. Don't forget to check the church records, because you can find some gems in early church records, particularly Baptist, but Methodists and Presbyterians are not far behind, nor are the Quakers. We didn't have as many Quakers down here, but if your family was Quakers, check those church records, because they got hauled up in front of the church and reprimanded for a lot of things that we go, why? And then there's my fourth great grandmother, Zilpha. So, in the records of, these are transcribed, in the records of the Welsh Neck Baptist Church in Darlington County, records are held at the Darlington County Historical Commission. And I neglected to write which year this was, but I know it was after 1816, because the baby in question is not my third great grandfather, who was born in 1816. And so, but it was not long after Zulfa married Ellen and Eustace. And of course, we're in South Carolina. There's no record findable at this point, unless the minister's record happens to survive and I happen to be able to find it. Unfortunately, the graveyard where all three of these people are buried has been plowed under. It was recorded in the Darlington County cemetery books back in the 60s. And so that is at least a transcription of it. It was very disheartening to find. Um, anyway, so the on the left hand one, the after church they had a business meeting, and they um got to the business of Sister Eustace, late Sister Rouse. So she was Sister Rouse when this illegitimate baby was born. We don't get a name for the baby. We don't know if the baby survives. But obviously a baby was born. And I still don't know whether Rouse was her maiden name, but I'm beginning to suspect it was, in which case my third great grandfather would have also been illegitimate, but so far the records don't go back as far as 1816 that I've been able to track. He may have also had a sister named Mary. And so anyway, there's also a brother Rouse who is older, who appears in some of these records. He is old and infirm, and so there is probably a connection. He could be Zulfa's uncle or father. Still putting the pieces together. And so they appointed someone to go talk to Sister Zulfa on the subject of this illegitimate child. And in the next page there, the top of the next page on page 103, we get the meeting after the next time they were meeting. And it is saying that Brother Gullidge reported that the rumor in regard to Mrs. Eustace was true. The church, being satisfied of her guilt and knowing that she had added falsehood and dissimulation of her to her other crime, excluded her by unanimous vote. And then it goes on that Brother Killen offered his excuse for absence, which was received. And so it's kind of interesting how the women of the day were judged so severely for things that aren't necessarily their fault. It takes two to tango, but the only one getting punished here was her. So she was excluded for lying about having had a child out of wedlock. Now, could this have been Eustace's child? Yes, we don't know how old, we don't know what it was. Of course, there are no birth records because we're early in the 1800s. But it's just more information that I have, and it may mean that either Rouse was a first married name and her husband had died, or whether Rouse was her maiden name. Still working on that. But check the church minutes if you know the church. At this point, I didn't know that they were necessarily in Welsh Neck Baptist Church. I did know that that is the closest place to where they were living in Darlington. And so you never know. So take a look. Now, the handout link that has been shared tonight is a little bit more robust in types of records to look for, things to look at and consider. Again, it is from a program I did about 5 years ago. And so I thought it was better to give you all the more robust handout. And if you are watching this on video, you are welcome to contact the Kennedy Room. Email KROOM at infodepot.org, infodepot.org. Or call Kennedy Room, contact us through the website. and we will be happy to send you a link to that document. Now, if you are with us in the live room, feel free to toss any questions, comments, whatever in the chat box. Women can be very fun but difficult to research, just because of all of the name variations. So, what has intrigued you about any of this, or where are you looking for uh your women, and maybe we can troubleshoot some places to look for them. As I said, it's in South Carolina in particular, it is a little bit of a chore, because we did not have standardized county marriage record requirements until July of 1911. Births and deaths did not start in most counties until January of 1915, when they were required to be fed up to the State Department of Vital Records. So that's pretty late compared to a lot of regions. We get a lot of questions on that regularly. Looking at probate and probate cases, I wish the inventory for that sale had been in the records I could access, but I could not access the inventory appraisals and the sale records when I was at the clerk of courts, that they may or may not have kept those, and I was out of time, so I couldn't ask to deep dive into that. Now, Carroll County also does now have, for 35 bucks a month, you can log in and pull down any of their historical records that they have scanned. And I may do that, but it was worth spending 2.5 hours in the clerk of court's office on their computers, printing on their paper, because it's formatted to print on legal size paper. The $33 worth of documents at 50 cents a pop, 66 documents. It was worth it. I was going to be in town anyway. And so it gave me a chance to talk to a distant cousin who's now deputy clerk of court. And we haven't figured out the connection, but he's a Quisenberry. And so,
Hey,
okay.
Charity.
Yes.
Charity, it's me, Cheryl.
Yep.
Listen, I have a question,
Yep.
and it's only because we were discussing it the other day. What about bastardy bonds?
Okay. Bastardy bonds are inconsistent in South Carolina, and I have not dug in the Darlington County records or asked specifically, because that very well could shed some light onto Zolfa Eustis's situation. North Carolina, they have particular court sessions where they just do bastardy bonds, which are, hey, this child was born out of wedlock. Who's going to be financially responsible for him or her? And so those records are in one record set called bastardy bonds. South Carolina, we did pull people in, the named father, or often the woman's father or brother or uncle would come in and say, I will take responsibility for raising this child financially, so that she didn't have to name the father or accuse someone of being the father. And so, but there is a record for who is taking financial responsibility. So yeah, they're easier to find in North Carolina on the county level. They're just part of the general court record in South Carolina. And hopefully those will become more easily searchable as Family Search gets their full text search going on more record sets than just the basic probate and land records. The handwriting recognition has come a long way, and their AI transcription is doing wonders, but they can't put everything in it at once. They're working on it.
Well,
So,
that's
yeah.
what I thought when you were talking about your I think it was grandmother, the one who had the baby
Yep, fourth great
out of
grandmother.
wedlock or whatever,
Mhm.
is that if there was a bastardy bond, that would at least give you perhaps the father's name. and
Right.
the baby's name. I don't know if they named the baby or not, but they might identify it as a boy or a girl.
Right. And it depends on how in depth the clerk writes, because a lot of times um they would say, you'd have testimony, but the clerk wouldn't record all of the testimony. They would just record the highlights. So it just like those church minutes. I'm sure there was more discussion among the men folk because the women probably weren't allowed to say anything
Oh,
unless they were being brought up in front of them. But
when we were researching the Go to Your Church
yep,
minutes or whatever, I mean, that was chock full of it. And Quaker records too, you're right.
yep,
They believed in rebuking, so they named
yes.
names and
Well, and it was just so fun because um pre-1900 records are more readily available for the land and probate. Pre-1900 is more readily available online, either at the state archives in South Carolina, the state library in Virginia, or on Family Search,
yeah.
um, or Ancestry. I mean, a lot of those Virginia records are on Ancestry.
Okay. Well,
And
it seems like there's no other questions,
no
so
burning questions. The women in your families must be more boring than the women in mine, I've come to learn. But yeah, when I found that record for Annis, Lucy, and Emmeline with the last one standing, I was like, "Oh, this is awesome." Um, and then that list of heirs at law, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things where you never know where you're gonna find the stuff. Um, but it was really helpful. Now, I have driven around, I meant to put this picture in there. I have driven around that home place property. It's now a cow field. Uh, yeah, cow pasture. Um, we were in my mother's brand new SUV at the time. Four-wheel drive, great. Yeah, above knee height grass, and it's rocky with lots of rocky outcroppings, and we could not figure out how to get over and down safely to where the old home place was in some trees with the cemetery above it. We had permission to drive down there, but we didn't think we needed to ask for where the path was to get there. And so we were in the field. So luckily someone else has photographed most of those graves. But it's just one of those situations where sometimes doing a trip, this was an earlier trip to Carroll County, but sometimes doing the trip by the seat of your pants doesn't always work out the way you hope it will. And then sometimes you get lucky and have a lot of information and serendipity happen. So
Okay, well,
oh,
before people end the session or whatever,
yep.
do you want to tell folks what's coming up next month?
Yes. So next month we will do a deeper dive into some land records, different types of land records, mostly pre-1900s. Um, and we'll look at some definitely in South Carolina as well as Virginia and maybe some North Carolina ones that I have found. Because the research differs state to state. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we're going to turn the recording off now.
Okay, good night, all.
Um,